The cost of living crisis is definitely real. However, it doesn't have to be your reality. I grew up in housing commission flats in New Zealand, and I wanted to share with you how a negative situation around you can actually become the opportunity you grab that everyone else walks past. Pick up a coffee and get ready to take notes. This is an episode that could completely change what you could build for yourself. With property investing in Australia, the way the media's built this landscape of what property investing is that everything's $1 million. And that is unfortunately created due to the fact that the two biggest cities are Sydney and Melbourne, and their surrounds put together generate more than half the eyeballs in the nation. So when you've got that, naturally the conversations start there. Whether you're watching the TV show of Lux Listings, or whether you're even just checking out what's in the media and you're seeing property unaffordability and difficulty and things becoming really tough from cost of living, this episode's going to help you in trying to really understand that those are all isolated with one or two cities, as I mentioned, making it look like that's the view all over the nation. What I want to share with you now is how you can actually break pricing down into different brackets across the country. Talk about the entry points and tactics you can deploy to make today's cost of living and what's deemed as everything being so expensive in investing, not a crisis, but an opportunity for you on your journey to build wealth. So if we start off with the data, the first thing to look at is breaking down price brackets across the nation. And when I'm looking at charts here, we have areas that we call SA3s. And just for simplification, it stands for Statistical Area 3. And all it is making our data sets cleaner by making many suburbs come together as a cluster. Okay. Now, another example that you might have heard more commonly is LGA, local government area, and they're not too far apart from each other. But if we use SA3 for a moment, I want to just share with you that there are still 32 SA3s across Australia with an under 400K median price point. There are 81 SA3s across Australia with a 400 to 600K price point. Now, if we just take average incomes, I know there's averages and medians, and you can break this apart in so many ways, say that I should have included that. That's not the type of analysis that's needed right now. It's just giving you a singular number to say, let's use this and take the average income. About 70 to 100, depending on borrowing capacity calculators and banks you go to, SA3s are available for you to purchase a house in. So what that clearly shows is that even in today's cost of living, there are areas where the average income across Australia, and even sometimes below average, could still have opportunities to purchase investment properties across the nation. And if not an investment, even a home to live in across the nation, when there are this many SA3 regions with under 400K and that many SA3 regions totaling 400 to 600 now, at about 113 areas now. Now that 113 areas, remember, each of these SA3s could range from sort of 30,000 in population all the way up to hundreds of thousands. So even millions in some affordable city. But for these price points, they're mainly in the hundreds of thousands. So there is no shortage of options. The options are there. It's just about where you're looking. That's the first part. Now, if we go into the price growth, some people feel and are often misguided to be thinking that, hey, no, you cannot buy property until you have a large budget. Well, we've already, broken that myth down. But the second thing is they're told you cannot have property price growth that will benefit your future, allow you to build wealth and grow your wealth unless your budget's high, unless you have a high income, unless you have high savings. Well, if we just take the last 12 months, because we already know long-term price growth, 90% of local government areas across the country have achieved upwards of 5% compounding growth. So the long-term stats are strong anywhere, almost anywhere, 90%. But if we take the last 12 months of average price growth, guess what? It was the under 400K. That average growth was 7.29%. And in the 400 to 600K, the average growth was 4.44%. And then if over 600K, the average growth was 1.35%. So it's clear that the SA3 level price growth, the last 12 months, the affordable markets were the ones strengthening. So if you take a step back and just pause and you go, inflation's out of control, interest rates are going up, things are difficult, and cost of living's hammering you, well, at that moment, everyone would have thought, well, why would I add a property to that? And I don't have the right income or the budget and I can't afford something that's a higher amount. Well, by targeting the opportunity at play, you would have seen it was actually the lower amount of markets, sub 400, that did the heavy lifting in price growth in Australia. So that's an important point to recognize. The moment where you saw there was just crisis and no opportunity, the biggest opportunity was actually the most affordable ends of the market. So that is one way to look at it. Now, the last way to look at it is, how do rental yields perform? Because remember, if you have a future that you're starting to create from investing, you've got a low deposit. At some times, or most cases, a low deposit can also stem from low savings rates, low income, and low time. So therefore, if all of these are lower, it's likely that you're wanting to have a higher rental yield to compensate for high interest rate costs during this environment. Now, you won't be able to completely make it positive cash flow in this environment. That just doesn't exist even at 6 to 7% rental yields. But the idea is that you're trying to make sure that the hits are as low as possible. And if that's the case, well, unintentionally by buying the most affordable, you're actually benefiting from rental yield. So the same brackets, if we take under 400K, the data here says that rental yields on average was 6.66%. If we take the SA3s under 600 but above 400, they were 5.08%. And then above 600K, obviously that gets lower and lower, but if we just took the long averages there of 3.39%. So that shows you that the rental yields were the most affordable, the price growth over the last 12 months was the strongest, and there was still plentiful options available under 400 and under 600, which means that the opportunity was there to invest in that crisis and still remains today. So that is the element of yield, price point, and growth rates that show you that you can enter these markets from that aspect and still get performance. So when you're looking at the entering part, there's obviously cost to enter, but a little known secret is that everyone is led to believe you're supposed to enter property markets with 20% deposits. That is very far from the truth. And so from that aspect of looking at your deposits, I have personal decisions where I've made property purchases with 5 to 10% deposits. Now, it's not as simple to say as just that, but what I'm trying to say is that that's a lot better entry point than having to put 20% down. So I'd encourage you to speak to a broker. And when you're speaking to a broker, speak to them about the various opportunities that exist. Firstly, if you're a first-time investor or home buyer, first-time home buyers are looking at properties where you can get 2 to 3% deposit for single parents, up to 5% deposits as well, with no mortgage insurance charged due to first home buyer schemes. So all of a sudden, if you can fit that in and get the right growth location and get an affordable property with no stamp duty, all of a sudden you've got no stamp duty, an affordable property with no lender's mortgage insurance, and say if it's within that 400K bracket, that's now $20,000 towards that property as a 5% deposit. That's potential some costs for legals, pest and building on top. But even with that, that makes it below $25,000 to be able to purchase it for that 400K property. Now, there could be property professionals like buyer's agents. If you want to use one, it's not mandatory, but if you were to use one, that added on top, but still under 50K there for a 400K property if it meets those first home and mortgage insurance savings environments. Now, you could stretch that to 100K and expand it even further, but what I'm trying to say is each number to each individual is different. But even if you had a lower entry point based on the last 12 months growth, the affordability of SA3s in the nation, and interest rates versus rental yields that are pretty decent in the under 400K, or the best in the nation actually, that would have shown you some price points that would have allowed all three to happen. Now, if you're not a first-time home buyer, you can still take 5% deposit loans and even less sometimes. So when you're doing that though, it just has a cost of doing business, which is mortgage insurance that can be with certain banks placed on top of the loan, which means that instead of your loan being, say, 90%, it might be 93 or 95% because 90% is what you had down, 10% you provide to the seller, and then the 2 to 4% or 3 to 5% is the cost of mortgage insurance going on top of your property loan. What this demonstrates is that there is opportunity that exists from bank to bank, lender to lender, and it's clear that if you can position yourself well the percentages are available for you to have that deposit far smaller, allowing you to enter markets with less money. Now, it's important to review your repayments to income as well and repayments to rents, because naturally with more loan comes more repayments. So that's some digging and homework to do. But it definitely shows you that the money that you need each time to make a deal is getting smaller, especially on the first one with the higher loan to value ratios, but it gets smaller through the concept of equity, which is when your first property starts to grow, you'll be able to take equity against that over time, borrow against what's available equity, and then be able to put that down as deposits for subsequent purchases. As you're looking at that, that's just one aspect, the price point you go into. And the second aspect is the lending that you take. And I have done the math many times over that long-term buying in Australia outweighs the cost of doing business with lenders' mortgage insurance every single time. And so that is the key here. You holding it for that little bit longer but getting in earlier has always, with the long-term history of Australia, been a winner. Or as the famous quote of Anchorman, right? 70% of the time, it works all the time, right? Now, when you're looking at deposits and purchase prices, this is just one element. But if we start looking at some of the things that are happening in the horizon, it's the prospects of interest rates getting lower. And so I would say that if you are in a position to be able to purchase before interest rates get lower, then you're likely to beat the people who are going to enter when they are in that position to do so. And they may only be in that position to do so once the interest rates get lower. So if you're in a position to do it before the interest rates get lower, it's important to look at it as you're actually before the pack getting in there because you have the capability to do it today. And that's an important thing as well. So when you're looking at all of this, these are just some things to consider. The fact that lenders' mortgage insurance, a cost of doing business, the fact that the affordable markets can still grow, rental yields are well placed, and price points exist in Australia for those, even amongst a cost of living crisis, to be able to try and secure their future. It's very important, and you can do that from some of these options I've shared with you today. And that's the thing. It's not unethical at all in a cost of living crisis for you to want to build your future because you're trying to get out of yourself being in that crisis ever again. And that's the thing that's really important to look after, is that to look at it differently, because sometimes property investing by certain audiences will constantly be seen as, well, no, that's anti that. Well, it isn't, because you're creating rental supply in the marketplace, which therefore funds more rental properties. And if rental properties are at a higher proportion, then the crisis component, of which rents make up one of it, is more balanced. So you're doing your part from alleviating that pressure, but you're also doing the part from ensuring you're not part of that pressure for yourself and your family by moving forward in life through creating wealth through those entry opportunities that exist. Even in my earlier years of investing outside of my home to live in, the investments that I started to actually purchase were all affordable investments to begin with, to get my momentum. I didn't wait for another blue chip home to come up or another high valued property to come up. I was able to keep moving and keep gaining momentum, which is something that you can do. Now, for staying this far in the episode, I want to give you one more bonus tip as you're considering how you can maximize the lower deposits if that's where you are. Well, here's one thing. If you actually look at just purchasing across different states, you will see a substantial variance in stamp duty. For example, if you were to look at the state of Victoria and you were to look at a property there, the state of Victoria, in somewhat similar extent to South Australia, you would have had stamp duty of about $19,070 for a 400K property at the time of review. Now in Queensland, this is $12,450. So almost $7,000 in saving for the same priced property. How much does that put in your back pocket? That can be a difference maker. So if you combine these elements of savvy tactfulness in terms of looking at different states, combine that with looking at price points where the rental yields are healthy, you can still get your foot into the door, and there's affordability with growth prospects. And lastly, you're doing it with lending that allows you to have more buffer, risk management, or speed up your entry to be able to get into the market, pending you can afford and meet all the standards. You are using an opportunity where even though things are against you and things might be tough in this environment, or your deposit might not be as high as possible, you found a way. And that was the same way that I found a way as I started to build my portfolio, and many of our clients do as well. There are so many scenarios out there where someone got denied to do something, they didn't do it, and they stepped back and they just left it alone, versus those that took baby steps forward. They took baby steps forward, purchasing affordable assets, getting runs on the board, and guess what? Now they're running. Like that's huge. So don't feel like you have to stand still and wait for this, to pass. It will pass, but make sure that you're moving forward closer to that finish line rather than standing and having to feel like you have to start again when the clouds clear up. If you enjoyed an episode like this where you get to actually understand how to get in with less and how to grow and prosper more, I'll make more content like this, but you can help me doing that by hitting like and subscribe on our YouTube page. And if you're on the podcast, drop us a review, give us a share to your friends and family as well who are keen to learn more about the property market in 2024 and get informed ahead.